The single most financially destructive event in the life of an average American adult is not a layoff. It is not a medical bankruptcy. It is not the 2008 housing crash. The single most financially destructive event, in absolute dollars, in the average life, is the divorce most people thought they would never have. Specifically, the one that happens after 50. The average documented net worth loss from a divorce after age 50 is approximately 77% for men and 73% for women. That is not a typo. 3/4 of everything you built, not as cash flow, as net worth, the thing you spent 30 years compounding, gone, in a single legal proceeding that on average takes just 14 months from filing to final decree. Here's the part that should make you sit up. The demographic this happens to most is not the one you expect. It is not the dramatic, chaotic, high-conflict marriages. It is the quiet, polite, functionally cooperative marriages between two people who, by every external measure, did everything right. Raised the kids, built the careers, bought the house, took the vacations, sent the kids to college, and then, somewhere in the empty quiet of the year, after the last child left, looked across the dinner table and realized they hadn't actually talked to each other in 8 months. You think the cost of gray divorce is the legal fees. The actual cost is something else entirely, and almost no one models it correctly before they are sitting in front of an attorney signing paperwork. My name is Dax, and on Dax Explains Money, I spend way too much time looking at the financial events that are statistically common for a meaningful percentage of the audience and almost completely unprepared for by everyone in it. Today, I'm going to walk you through why gray divorce, defined as divorce after age 50, is the single most underestimated financial risk in the average upper middle class American life. The 4 specific mechanisms that turn it from expensive to permanently transformative, and the dollar math behind each one. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the divorce that feels like the resolution of a long, slow, personal problem is, financially, the start of a problem you may not solve. Before I get into the mechanisms, I need to give you the metaphor that anchors everything else. And this one requires you to picture something specific. Picture an orchard, not a metaphor, a real orchard. 40 acres of fruit trees, you and one other person, have spent 3 decades planting, pruning, watering, weeding. You started with bare ground. You added trees 1 row at a time. Some you bought as saplings, some you grafted yourself, some you raised from cuttings. The first 10 years, you got almost nothing back. The trees needed time. The second 10 years, you got a small harvest each summer, enough to taste, not enough to live on. By year 30, the trees were finally bearing the way they were always meant to bear. The yield was about to compound. The next 10 years were going to produce more fruit than the previous 30 combined. Then, in year 31, the orchard gets divided. Not by storm, not by blight, by legal decree. A fence goes up down the middle. You get 20 acres. The other person gets 20 acres. Here's what is not obvious until you sit with the math. You did not lose half your orchard. You lost dramatically more than half of your future yield. The reason is mechanical. An orchard is a compounding asset. The trees that were going to produce the most fruit are the ones you planted earliest, because they have had the most time to mature, develop their root systems, and reach their productive peak. When you cut the orchard in half, you don't cut the future yield in half. You cut yourself off from the network effects of the whole, the cross-pollination, the shared windbreak, the irrigation system that only made sense at full scale. Your half orchard now produces something closer to 1/3 of what the whole was about to produce, and there is no replanting at 55 and waiting another 30 years. Your marriage, financially, is an orchard. The dollars you have compounded together for 30 years are about to enter the highest yield decade of their entire existence, the decade right before retirement, when the dollar value of 1 year of growth is greater than the dollar value of the first 10 years of saving combined. That is the decade Great Divorce happens in. And it does not cut your wealth in half. It cuts what your wealth could have become. Now let me walk you through the 4 mechanisms, because each one operates differently, and almost no one accounts for all of them at the same time. I want you to meet someone first, because his story is going to follow us through the rest of this video. His name is Frank. He's 57 years old. Operations director at a regional manufacturing company outside Cleveland. Earns $185,000 a year. Married to Susan, also 57, for 31 years. 2 kids, both in their late 20s, both launched. The house, paid off 2 years ago. The retirement accounts, jointly held, totaling approximately $1.4 million between his 401k, Susan's IRA from when she worked, and a joint brokerage account. Frank and Susan are not in a dramatic marriage. They have not screamed at each other in years. They have, somewhere between year 25 and year 30, become roommates with shared logistics. The kids leaving accelerated something that had been quietly building for a decade. 6 months ago, Susan said, almost calmly, "I think we should think about whether we still want to be married." Frank did not disagree. He just hadn't been the one to say it first. They have not yet filed. They are in the conversation phase. Frank thinks of this as 2 responsible adults working through a hard problem together. He's wrong. He's in the most expensive financial year of his life, and he does not know it. Let me start with the first mechanism, because it is the one almost nobody runs the math on. Frank and Susan have $1.4 million in retirement assets at 57. If they stay married and contribute nothing additional for the next 10 years, growing at a 6% average annual return, a deliberately modest assumption, they would arrive at 67 with approximately $2.51 million. Now split it. Frank gets $700,000. Susan gets $700,000. Each one of them, growing at the same 6% over the same 10 years, arrives at 67 with approximately $1.25 million. Add Frank's and Susan's halves back together, and you get $2.5 million. So nothing seems lost. The math says the split is neutral. This is the part the math says, but the lifestyle does not. A married couple at 67 needs 1 house, 1 set of utilities, 1 car insurance policy in each state, 1 streaming bundle, 1 Costco membership. 2 divorced 67-year-olds need 2 of all of those. The cost of maintaining 2 single-person households at 67 is not 100% of the cost of maintaining 1 couple's household. It is roughly 165% to 175%. Housing is the worst offender. Rent or mortgage doubles. Taxes don't have. Insurance increases on a single-person basis. Healthcare premiums calibrate differently for a single person on the marketplace than for a couple. So the $2.5 million that would have funded 1 shared retirement is now $2.5 million, funding 2 retirements that need approximately 1.7 times the spending. The math was not neutral. The math only told you what was on the surface. Underneath, each person now has roughly 60% of the buying power they would have had together. And that is before we get to the second mechanism, which is the one most people genuinely don't see coming. The American retirement system was built on the assumption that most people would arrive at retirement as part of a household, not as a moral statement, as a structural assumption embedded in the tax code, the Social Security system, and every employer pension still in existence. Here's what that looks like in practice. Social Security has a spousal benefit. If you were married for at least 10 years, you can claim benefits based on your spouse's earnings record, or your ex-spouse's, after divorce, as long as you have not remarried. For most couples, where one earns significantly more than the other, this is worth tens of thousands of dollars per year in retirement. Susan, who worked part-time for most of the marriage to raise the kids, has a much lower Social Security earnings history than Frank. As Frank's wife, her projected Social Security at full retirement age is about $2,800 a month. As Frank's ex-wife claiming on his record, it is roughly the same. Fine. But here's the part. If Susan remarries before 60, she loses the ability to claim on Frank's record at all. If Frank dies before Susan, the survivor benefit she would have received as his widow is permanently smaller than what she would have had if they had remained married. The system rewards continuous marriage in ways that are not visible until they begin to bite. And then there are the pensions. Pensions, where they still exist, almost always offer two payout options: a single life annuity, which pays a higher monthly amount but ends when the retiree dies, or a joint and survivor annuity, which pays a lower amount but continues to the surviving spouse. The default election for married workers is joint and survivor. After divorce, that election typically converts to single life. The monthly amount goes up. The structural protection for the lesser earning spouse goes to zero. Frank has a small legacy pension from his first 12 years at a previous employer, about $1,400 a month at 65, currently elected as joint and survivor with Susan as beneficiary. After divorce, that election will change. Susan's projected retirement income, when you stack the lost spousal protections together, drops by approximately $14,000 a year compared to her married scenario. Frank's doesn't drop. So the divorce, on paper, doesn't cost Frank anything in retirement structure. Except it does. Because every dollar of structural retirement income that Susan loses is, in the legal proceeding, going to be made up out of Frank's share of the marital assets. The judge does not let it sit. So the dollar math flows back to Frank eventually, just routed through a different pipe. By the way, if this is landing for you, hit subscribe. The algorithm is the algorithm, and the only way it keeps surfacing videos that walk through the actual mechanics of these systems is if viewers tell it to. Now let me walk into the third mechanism, because this is where the math gets very specific and very ugly for almost every couple who divorces after 50. Frank and Susan's house is worth $620,000. The mortgage is paid off. From a balance sheet perspective, that is $620,000 in home equity, free and clear. In a divorce settlement, it gets divided. Two outcomes are possible. Either one of them buys the other out, taking on a new mortgage at age 57 to do it, a mortgage that did not exist before. Or they sell the house and split the proceeds. Selling sounds clean. It is not clean. Once the house sells, Frank needs housing. Susan needs housing. Each of them has $310,000 in proceeds. Neither one of them is buying a $310,000 home in their existing metropolitan area, because $310,000 does not buy a single-family home anywhere near where they currently live. So either each of them takes out a mortgage at 57 to buy something smaller and more expensive than the home they just sold, or one or both of them downsizes geographically, which means leaving their community, their friends, their established routines, often their kids and grandkids, at a stage of life when those connections are most of what keeps people emotionally healthy. Frank ends up buying a townhouse for $410,000 with a $200,000 mortgage at 6.5%, the rate available in this market for a 57-year-old with a 25-year horizon, which is also longer than he reasonably expects to be working. His monthly mortgage payment, taxes, and insurance combined is now about $2,200 on a property he did not own 3 months ago. Susan ends up renting a one-bedroom for $1,950 a month because she cannot qualify for a mortgage on her current income without alimony, and the alimony has not been finalized. Pre-divorce, Frank and Susan paid $0 in housing costs each month. They owned a paid-off home. Post-divorce, the combined housing cost across both households is approximately $4,150 a month. Same equity, same overall asset base, fundamentally different financial reality, and $4,150 a month, compounded out over 20 years at the cost of money invested, is approximately $1.6 million in foregone wealth. Not earned, not lost, just diverted from compounding into the most basic ongoing expense of being alive. Now, the fourth mechanism, and this one is the subtlest. Frank and Susan have, over 31 years, built a life calibrated to 2 incomes and 1 household. The car they drive, the vacations they take, the restaurants they eat at, the gifts they give, the college funds they sent for the grandkids, the annual donation to the Alumni Association, the country club membership, the dinner parties they host every other month. Every single one of those decisions was, structurally, built around a household economy. None of them was built around two parallel single-person economies, and almost none of them can be easily downscaled without a corresponding loss of identity. Frank, post-divorce, is going to maintain the country club membership for a while, because his professional network is partly there. He's going to keep the car he drove during the marriage, because replacing it requires a financing decision he does not have the bandwidth for. He's going to continue the small annual donations because canceling them feels like signaling failure to people whose opinion he has cared about for decades. Susan, post-divorce, is going to keep many of the same patterns for similar reasons. She does not want to send the signal that she is now poor. She isn't poor. She's adjusted. But the social signal cost of adjusting visibly is high, and most people do not do it for at least the first 2 to 3 years. So Frank and Susan, individually, are now each maintaining roughly 70% of the joint lifestyle on roughly 50% of the joint resources. The math does not work. The math has never worked in this exact situation, and yet almost everyone who goes through it spends the first 18 to 24 months trying to hold the previous shape of their lives in place. Now let me make the compound cost unavoidable. Frank and Susan, married at 67, with their $2.5 million projected portfolio, can comfortably withdraw $100,000 a year, a 4% withdrawal, and combined with their joint Social Security of approximately $58,000 annually, generate $158,000 in retirement income against a baseline expense structure of $115,000 a year for two people sharing a household. They have margin, they have a travel budget, they have grandchildren gift money, they can retire and not worry every month. Frank, divorced at 67, with his $1.25 million half portfolio, can withdraw $50,000 a year at 4%, plus his Social Security of approximately $36,000 for a total retirement income of $86,000. His baseline expense structure, single in the townhouse, is approximately $78,000 a year. He has $8,000 of margin against everything that might go wrong in a single year of retirement. One medical issue, one home repair, one transmission, and he is into principal. Susan, divorced, at 67, with her $1.25 million half portfolio, can withdraw $50,000 a year, plus her Social Security of approximately $28,000 after the spousal benefit recalibration, for a total of $78,000. Her baseline expense structure, single in the rental, is approximately $72,000 a year. She has $6,000 of margin, slightly tighter than Frank's, slightly more fragile. Neither one of them is poor. Both of them are dramatically less financially safe than they would have been together, and neither one of them can reverse it. These are not extreme assumptions. Frank and Susan are not bad cases. They are, statistically, a relatively well-prepared American couple in their late 50s. The median couple is much worse off, and a meaningful percentage of gray divorces leave at least one of the parties in genuine retirement precarity. Here's what you actually do with all of this. 3 things. Specific. First, and this one is hard to say without sounding like a marriage counselor, calculate the financial map of your marriage before you assume divorce is the cleanest exit. Specifically, model your projected retirement income under 3 scenarios: married, divorced, Divorced with realistic remarriage rates factored in, which for women over 60 are approximately 5% over 10 years, and for men over 60 are approximately 28%. Most people considering gray divorce skip this exercise entirely because it feels mercenary in the middle of a difficult emotional conversation. But the math is real, and the math will eventually arrive whether you ran it in advance or not. Better to know. Second, if divorce is the path, before you go to court, hire a certified divorce financial analyst. That is a specific credential, CDFA, to model the long-term retirement implications of the proposed settlement. Most divorce attorneys are not equipped to model 20-year compounding effects, retirement structure changes, and Social Security strategy. The CDFA is. The cost is typically $3,000 to $7,000 for a comprehensive analysis. The cost of getting a settlement structurally wrong is, on average, somewhere between $200,000 and $600,000 of retirement income variance over 20 years. The ratio is not close. Third, and this one applies whether you divorce or stay together, stop assuming that retirement assets get more secure as they grow larger. Frank and Susan had $1.4 million at 57 and felt safe. They were not safe. They were on track only if no fundamental structural event happened, and gray divorce is the most likely structural event for an upper middle class American couple in this window, more likely than disabling illness, more likely than involuntary job loss, more likely than a 2020-style economic disruption. The portfolio that looks safe to one financial plan can vanish into two unsafe portfolios in a single 14-month proceeding. Build resilience for that as if it were as likely as it actually is. Let me close where I started. You spent 30 years planting an orchard. The trees are about to bear. The decade ahead was going to be the best yield of your life. That math is real. It is just not guaranteed to be yours. A divorce in your 50s is not a personal failure. Most of the time, it is the visible end of something that had been quietly true for 15 years before it became official. But it is also, mathematically, the single most consequential financial decision a person can make at this stage of life, and it is made, almost without exception, when both parties are emotionally exhausted and not in a state to model compounding effects across a 20-year horizon. The orchard is yours until the fence goes up. The decade before the fence is the decade to know what the fence will cost. Not to scare yourself out of a decision that may be right. To make sure that whichever decision you make, it is made by someone who actually saw what was coming. Run the math, pull the paperwork, sit with what the numbers actually mean before the lawyers do it for you. The orchard is still yours. I'll see you in the next one.